TV18.
Hello and welcome to Mind Matters, an invitation to well-being. I'm Shereen Bhan. Today, on the occasion of World Mental Health Day, we focus on the need to raise awareness about mental health and remove the stigma attached to talking about it. The World Health Organization labeled India as the most depressed country in 2018. India's National Mental Health Survey, conducted in 2019, estimated that over 56 million Indians suffered from some form of depression and 38 million Indians suffered from anxiety disorder. Despite the high prevalence of mental disorders in India, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences has reported that over 80% of Indians do not have access to mental care services. CNBC TV18 launched a campaign, Mind Matters, an invitation to well-being, on the 1st of April with an aim to highlight the importance of mental health, create awareness and eliminate stigma. So today, we discuss what companies are doing to be able to address mental health in the workplace, how we can make our work environment, our work spaces much more conducive and much more collaborative to ensure that mental health and mental well-being are taken care of. To take this discussion forward, we're joined by Alok Kshirsagar, Senior Partner at McKinsey. He has, of course, been working on this issue across India and the Asia region. We also have with us author and columnist Aparna Piramal Raje, who authored Chemical Khichdi, How I Hacked My Mental Health, a book on her own experiences of living with serious mental health conditions for the last 2 decades and what she has been able to do about that. Pramath, Sinha, the founder chairman of Harappa Education. He's also the founder and trustee of the Ashoka University. He is also working towards a committed workplace mental health ally and familiar with mental health issues. Also with us on the show, Radhika Gupta, Managing Director and CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management. Aparna, Radhika, Pramath and Alok, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV18. Thanks very much for joining us on this very important campaign that we launched in April this year, and we continue to take those conversations forward. Aparna, I want to understand from you, over the 2 decades that you've dealt with your own personal issues and you've focused on being able to mainstream this issue, what are the changes that you've seen?
As you said, I think the willingness to have the conversation, to recognize that, mental health issues are not personality issues, but that they are actually medical issues. The willingness to realize that it's not other people who have it, but it's really all of us who are dealing with it. So I think all of these conversations that are beginning to happen are very, very positive.
They are certainly positive, Aparna, but I want to understand from you, since we are today talking about the changes that corporate India is making, that we are trying to make in our workspaces to ensure that this is an issue that is addressed because it impacts productivity, it causes a great degree of economic loss as well, and of course there are social issues attached to it and social considerations that we must be mindful of. What are the changes that you believe corporate India has been able to put in place to deal with this as a challenge?
Well, I think the biggest change that I'm seeing is that I think leadership is interested. So just to give you an anecdotal example, just yesterday, I made a short video on how business leaders could communicate about World Mental Health Day in the workplace. And I sent it to about 200 CEOs that I knew. And I just got a tremendous response to it where they were actually genuinely grateful that I sent it and they found it helpful. Many of them said that they would share it with their teams. And that's not the normal response you get when you share a piece of communication or content out with, a group of senior people. So I think what is happening is that it is becoming something that is getting more CEO mind space. While it's perhaps always been something that HR people have been interested in, it's also getting the CEO mind space. And what we really need is more tools and techniques around that to take this conversation further and to actually have to get results out of it.
Radhika, you've also spoken openly about the challenges that you've personally had to deal with in terms of the leadership mind space now being given to an important issue like mental well-being. How have you seen things change around you, and what are you as a leader doing to nurture this change as well?
I think, firstly, it's great that we're having this conversation. I think in the post-COVID world, at least there is a recognition that mental health issues are real issues in the workplaces. They come up in conversations that we as CEOs have with our people, with team leaders, with HR leaders. So there's a recognition that this is not a floozy issue, that this is serious stuff. And I think that is, positive. A couple of things that I truly believe that we are doing and that organizations should do. One is genuinely making offices more open. I always say we should be bound as much by our successes as team members as we should by our anxieties, by our challenges. So, building open cultures in offices where you are using the power of stories to discuss vulnerabilities, I truly believe role modeling is a very, very powerful thing. And if senior leadership goes out and role models the fact that they are vulnerable, they have challenges, I think it is very powerful. The second thing that we can do is that when a colleague talks to us about mental health issues, and we have certainly seen this post COVID, more and more people are reaching out saying, I'm struggling with mental health, talking them through it and also providing them the resources. Mental health finally requires professional help. So, one of the things I was talking about this in the context of pregnancy, because postpartum depression, and I'm someone who's just had a baby, is also a real mental health issue. Can we guide colleagues and provide them the resources in that critical period, not just postpartum, of course, to deal with mental health? I think these are two things that we can definitely do.
Alok, are you seeing more of that happen? As Aparna said, that this was something that HR would sort of look at, but now it is becoming an issue that CEOs, the top leadership of a company, are getting involved in. How much of a change have you seen in terms of the kinds of practices that companies in India as well as the region are now putting in place? The practices that you're seeing are becoming more prevalent within the corporate environment.
No, thank you, Shereen. I'll just give you one number to make this come alive. In our survey of Indian workers relative to other countries, 40% of Indian workers say they have any form of burnout, anxiety, or depression. This compares to 25% as the Asia average, which in and of itself is above the global average. So that's 40% of people working in our companies have some form of burnout, anxiety, and depression. The number one cause of leaving a company is not compensation, it's toxic workforce behavior. So this is a leadership issue. It is a real challenge where when we look at absenteeism, productivity, you name it, it is a challenge of well-being that is across every aspect of our organizations. And we do see some companies in India, and particularly more visionary leaders, understand that this is a business and cultural issue. It's not a HR function issue. It's not something to be thought about one time a year, and they've actually imbued it into their practice. So, just to give you an example, one of the biggest changes I see is not averaging performance. You often find that some of the so called best performers are also amongst the worst contributors to toxic workforce behavior. And so, one of the big changes we have seen, and by the way, we at McKinsey have done it for ourselves, is that we do not average performance and behavior. If you are a poorly performed leader, you will actually be derated or asked to move out. And even if you so called got your results in one particular year. So, to me, I think the number one thing is this focus on toxic workforce behavior. And tied to that, to what Radhika and Aparna was saying, an understanding that this is not a one size fits all program. The needs, the mental health needs are actually personal, but they vary. You're a young person living alone, struggling in a big city is very different than someone caring for
Yeah.
young children. Is very different someone a little bit older who has to now care for elderly parents or relatives in a different city. And so I'm seeing companies who are more progressive on this take a lot more thought into what types of programs, so each of those types of people that you have. And
Yeah.
finally, it is really about empowering the individual cells. What you do in a manufacturing factory floor will be different than a sales organization, will be different than your finance organization. So, this idea of saying this is not just some top down HR program, but you're empowering lots of
Yeah.
people to come up with the initiatives and supporting them with professional help. But this is a business challenge, it is not an HR issue.
But Pramath, I want to come back to you and address the issue of culture. As Alok said, 40%, much higher than the global average. That is the burnout ratio when we talk about Indian employees. And he attributed that to a toxic culture. How much of that has to do with the fact that culturally we are hierarchical, culturally we are patriarchal? What do you do about these these subconscious sort of traits that you bring to the workplace, that you have at home, and this transference that takes place? How do you cope with that? How do you ensure that you create a less toxic environment and less toxic culture so that attrition is not that high, burnout is not that high, and there is actually a feeling of empowerment within the organization?
I don't think, Shereen, there is a silver bullet to getting rid of the toxic culture. I think toxic bosses have been around for a long time, and toxic organizations also. I do think that in terms of driving a change in culture, the signals from the top are very important. And I think making sure that top leadership sends out a clear signal that certain types of behavior are unacceptable, that certain kinds of challenges, whether it's physical challenges or mental health challenges, are things that the organization is willing to talk about, make efforts to alleviate and help on, is also very important. And I think some of these things have already been said. Creating an environment where people feel that they can talk about things openly without it damaging their careers or their jobs or their professional advancement is extremely important. I think mentorship at the workplace, having everybody have someone they can go to who they can freely express themselves, and sometimes that's not always your boss, but it could be somebody else in the organization. Setting up formal structures where people can come and report an incident or how they are feeling without feeling again that it would badly impact them in any way. So there's a host of things we have to do. I think in terms of culture change in general, if the people at the top don't walk the talk, then the rest of the organization doesn't really believe in it. So I think it's to the point that was mentioned earlier about top leadership. I think showing that commitment, demonstrating that, walking the talk, and then putting in place formal mechanisms to address that, which one tends to do anyway. I think the combination of that can be very powerful.
But Radhika, let's talk about the tools, techniques, and the formal mechanisms that Pramath was also talking about. Globally, for instance, you're seeing many organizations now experiment with the idea of a 4-day week. There are organizations and countries where now, as per mandate, you cannot email somebody on a work-related matter after a certain time or a certain day of the week. Is that going too far? Or do you believe that there is a middle path that we can walk?
I think we have to walk a middle path, and it's very important to walk a middle path. There are organizations post-COVID that have gone to the old path and too much of the old path, and that sends a signal to employees that I don't trust you. I need you to be at work because I don't trust you, and that's definitely not the path that we don't want to go down. I also don't think you need to be prescriptive, though. I'm not a buyer of the theory that people can't send an email after 8 o'clock and people can't work after 5 o'clock. We're less empathetic if we work 6 days a week versus 5 days a week. I think you have to show consideration for the fact that people have a life outside of work, and that shows in your actions. When employees are sick, when they need that crucial time off, how managers react in these individual instances, I think, is far more powerful than putting down prescriptive policies. So we need to find a middle ground, but that middle ground comes from a place of showing employees that you understand rather than putting up policies on a wall.
अरे सिर्फ 19,400।
हर बड़ी खरीदारी लाती है बड़ी झिझक।
1,19,000 बेटा आजकल सबका मोबाइल पे होता है। ये लैपटॉप का जमाना तो गया।
सर, मैं आपकी झिझक मिटाऊं?
आप कौन?
मैं इनोवेटी करूं हर परचेज इजी, किसी भी डेबिट या क्रेडिट कार्ड पे EMI ऑप्शंस दिलाकर।
लीजिए सर, आपका बिल हो गया डिवाइड
और खुशियां मल्टीप्लाई।
इनोवेटी हर स्वाइप में एक नई कहानी।
India's economic boom is creating
an energy demand that's almost unquenchable,
making sustainable energy sources indispensable.
For seamless adoption of clean energy,
We need actionable plans
that drive
commitment and sustainability.
So, join us
And together we'll create
a roadmap for this
clean energy transition
to a nationwide green movement
and showcase innovative technology
that can make the vision
of a sustainable future
attainable. Tata Power
sustainable
is attainable.
Volkswagen Tygoon, 1 year of hustle. Volkswagen.
IX Ego.
Dada, IX Ego नहीं Ixigo.
Exigo.
Exigo नहीं Ixigo.
नाम में क्या लगा है बिड़ू? सीधा बोल देने का। Ixigo ट्रैवल ऐप डाउनलोड करो, बिंदास टिकट बुक करो और निकल लो। यूं ही नहीं मैं बन जाता हूं। कुदरत के कोने कोने से खूबियां खोज लाता हूं। गुणवत्ता की गहराइयों का गोताखोर हूं मैं। पर उम्दापन की नई ऊंचाइयों को छूना चाहता हूं मैं। यूं ही नहीं मैं रजनीगंधा बन जाता हूं।
Aparna, I want to take that point forward with you. As Radhika said, instead of being prescriptive, what we need is empathetic leadership. What we need is leadership to be considerate and sensitive. In your experience of having put the book together as well as the conversations that you're having, how are people now addressing these challenges? I mean, what is good versus what is bad behavior when we talk about being able to address this challenge? Because at the end of the day, you also need to ensure that it is a productive organization, it is an outcome-based organization, and you only have limited resources in terms of manpower. So how do you balance all of this out? What are the conversations based on the chats that you've had telling you?
Well, I think firstly, people are just waking up to the size of the problem. I think, as Alok says, that this 40%, I did a webinar with a company which had 1,000 people show up for it, and the questions just went on and on for 90 minutes. And the company actually just said, this is a eye opener for us, that this is the magnitude of the problem, that people are quite stressed. So I think that when they realize that there's actually a correlation between the stress, and that stress is not an indicator that things are going right and that productivity is happening, but rather that stress is an indicator that things are not going in the direction that we want, then I think we'll see examples. And just to the point of toxic bosses, I mean, I wonder if we could have, the toxic helpline, just like we have resources for sexual harassment. Like, what would that look like? If there was a reporting mechanism where people could talk about toxic bosses without fear of career or job implications, So I think it's just this link between actually what's happening in the workplace and what the relationship is with the performance and the productivity of the organization is just about happening now. And the other thing I would say is that, to the point about empathy, is that many organizations during COVID really went all out to help their employees, right? To give them the care that they required. So if we just adopted this outlook that this is a shadow pandemic after COVID, and it requires the same kind of care and empathy. I think if Pramath wants to, he can share a story of how he's been empathetic with me. And I was manic on my first day on the job. So you can imagine, Shereen, what it's like being mentally unstable on the first day of a new job and what happened to that. But he showed me a lot of empathy and gave me a second chance. So I just think that if we adopt this mindset that this is a shadow pandemic, we dealt so well in many cases with the pandemic and we saved lives. We are also saving lives here and getting people to live to their full potential. Because if you can actually tackle mental health and mental conditions of stress and anxiety, people will actually be performing better rather than being in the situation that they are now.
Pramath, but I want to go back and get you to address Aparna's story because, that's important as well. And maybe through that story, it will give all of us lessons on how to actually deal with second chances, on how to deal with people who are struggling, who are trying to do their very best, but at that point in time just aren't able to do so. So take us through that story and share with us what you did. You're on mute, Pramath.
Whoops. Aparna is very kind and generous about this story, but it goes back to your earlier question about changing culture. I think the demonstration effect of doing something that other people can see and notice is also very powerful in changing culture. But going to her specific story, she was supposed to teach a class in a university that I'm involved in. And I had no idea till that point in time that she had the challenges that she was facing, till she called me to say that she just couldn't teach the class. And to your point about productivity and performance, it was a huge setback because there was a bunch of students waiting for the class to start. And here was the faculty member saying they just couldn't do it. And one of the switches that has gone on in my head over time is this point that you actually mentioned, to treat this as a physical ailment, not to equate ailments, but just as you said, if somebody had a broken arm or they got fever and couldn't come, it's the same thing. And so the first thing I always think when these incidents happen is to treat it as an illness and not make a bigger deal than that about it. And so my first thing was, okay, you are not coming. This happens all the time. A faculty member is not able to show up. A pilot can't show up for a plane. People manage. So I said, I made the arrangements for the schedule to be rejigged. But then I also realized when talking to Aparna that actually teaching the course was very important to her. And I did see that I could have easily said, listen, let's cancel the course. But I then did go out of my way, I think, or the university did, to find a slot for her later when she was better. And I think that's what made the story complete. Not just saying, okay, fine, we'll take into account the fact that you can't show up and we'll make other arrangements, but going that a bit extra to say, what will actually help her deal with this situation better? And I think that extra bit is what made all the difference.
But Alok, I want to come back again to the point that we've just raised here in terms of how the workplace deals with this. And as Pramath rightly pointed out, you deal with broken arms or a viral fever or a surgery or any other physical illness with leave and, extended leave or paid leave or unpaid leave or whatever the case may be. We have now started to see organizations provide mental well-being days or mental health days as well. What are some of the other sort of tools, techniques that organizations have now been able to mold in to the workplace culture to deal with this post-COVID?
So Shereen, I want to say three things. Number one, there's a set of tools and practices that are very important. It's the confidential 24/7 hotline. It's access to professional services. It's the ability to provide days and other things like that you discussed. But that's only the first and foundational layer. The other aspect is actually in how you drive your day-to-day organization and practices. So it's simple things like the extent to which you're able to have a moment before a staff meeting, or you're able to create space in a Monday morning meeting for people to talk about what are they facing as both challenges as well as things that they're excited about. So that doesn't become only a good news story. And the third aspect, which I think is particularly relevant in our country, is to bust the myth that driving performance and being nice are in opposition to each other. So when you look at inside that root cause of why do 90% of people leave, it's a belief that said, if I want to get results, I'm going to be extremely demanding, and only if I set, outrageous targets and yell and scream will people actually make it happen. The reality is the best sustained performers are also the most empathetic and collaborative leaders, right? Those who are aggressive may be aggressive for 1 year, they're not able to sustain it. So we get this message through with top leadership as well, that if you want sustained performance with excited, energized employees, you're going to have leaders who do the same. So you need to have the practices and tools, but you also need to celebrate folks. You need to have those moments and put it into performances. Don't average it out, right? You cannot be a good performer if you're not also an empathetic leader.
Alok, Aparna, Radhika and Pramath, many thanks for joining us here on this special edition of Mind Matters, an invitation to well-being. This is a campaign that CNBC TV 18 launched in April, and we intend to continue this conversation here. It's an important conversation to be had. So thanks very much for joining us on the Mental Health Day. We will take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.